Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. My name is Isha Dandavate, and I am proud today to moderate the event celebrating the release of my father, Uday Dandavate's fourth book, Being and Belonging, A Journey of Curiosity and Imagination. So as I'm introducing this, I was thinking, when did the story of this book begin? Obviously, it began with the birth of my father, but I think more recently, it began 5 years ago. 5 years ago, the world faced a global pandemic, and Uday began a series of projects reflecting on humanity. He wrote poetry. He conducted a series of interviews on the oral history of India's imagination. He did countless projects leading community conversations. And in those 5 years, he's written four books. All of his books have been incredibly personal, glimpses into how he looks at the world, embraces curiosity, retains a childlike imagination, and embraces humanity. This book is a culmination of sorts. It's a culmination of the years of conversations that he has led. And it's an invitation, really, the readers to contemplate what does it mean to be human in the age of AI, in an age when AI is both strengthening and boosting, as well as threatening human creativity and humanity. It's an invitation for us to think about how our shared experiences can shape the future through interdependence, collaboration, and creativity. Those of you who have been with us in the launches of the three previous books might remember and might have noticed that Uday's voice does not really fill much of the time at these events. So when I began preparing for this launch, I asked him, since this particular book is more of an autobiography, shouldn't you speak a little more? And as always, he responded that the beauty of these events is in hearing the different interpretations of people from diverse countries, industries, journeys who have found meaning in his words and can share their interpretation with others. So in the next hour, you'll hear from six esteemed design thinkers who will share their perspectives on the insights that they've gleaned from this book. And then you'll hear a few words from the team behind the book, the designer, the editor, and the author. So thank you so much for joining and listening. Let's get started. Our first speaker is Professor Narendra Dengle, an architect, author, artist, and educator based in Pune. He also wrote the foreword for this book. Professor Dengle, can you please unmute? And please join us to give your 5 minutes.
All right. Okay. It's been really a matter of pleasure for me to be associated with this project right from the beginning, really. And having read the script twice, probably, and then having written the foreword, I thought I should say something different. And revisiting the book, I've jotted down a few points which I would like to read from. So Uday Dandavate's book, Being and Belonging, A Journey of Curiosity and Imagination, is an engaging book. Once again, browsing through it for Uday's book launch, I have jotted down these points. The first thing to note is the sense of time that is reflected in being and belonging. Both have the sense of time. His being wants to ride the beam of light, and the belonging explores the territory of freedom within the field of memories, of encounters with people, places, and processes leading to action. His vehicle to traverse these territories has been poetry. And this was probably more intensely felt by him during the pandemic. His reference to curiosity appears to me to be about how people of different walks of life drew their convictions, conclusions, and what questions they pursued in their lives, both in ordinary, so-called ordinary lives and creative lives. I don't think there is any difference between the two. He has never lost holding the hand of his inner child. That is very clear, and which is, I think, not many people can do. In a way, the universal consciousness in search of freedom. In this search, he knows how to distance himself from wantonness. As a realist, he realizes the preserving of humanity must be accepted as a field of movement, explorations. Automatically, it chalks out an ethical path for this movement that leads to myriad experiences in his journey. Collective consciousness intensifies in the perceptory act of design, moving away from the glamorous, egotistic field, the imagery of designer and artist. At this stage, one also questions what might be the meaning of independent thinker. Is the thinker independent at all from his ethical pursuits or whatever Uday has chalked down? The image of the buccaneer scholar is very attractive indeed. There are several in their respective fields are buccaneer scholars, each having their magnetic fields that struggle to find a suitable method and structure for expression. And the curious traveler holding the torch of unlearning must be able to jump the fields as well. This is the paradox one enjoys in life. Most interestingly, he realizes that architecture is an older sibling of design. In fact, it has been argued that architecture precedes philosophy. As an architect who's recently engaged in teaching Christopher Alexander's Nature of Order, I find that Uday's narrations very well resonates with Alexander's lifelong research in the field, especially a pattern language. In the lenses of perception, he's role-playing, which is really wonderful. And role-playing, as it were, to see the importance of the phenomenon of the tide of change and how different people engage and deal with their experiences in this tide of change. He refers to Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha, who famously replies to a question about what he can do. And Siddhartha says, I can think, I can wait, and I can fast. This honest confession of one's potentiality is dense with meanings and non-negotiable as it comes without being imposing on others. Uday probes into what hinders an introvert from writing a poem. That's the question he's asking. Is it really that one is afraid of one's intimate thoughts becoming public? Or is one worried about one's articulation and grammar holding back? The fog and mist that surrounds an unmanifest idea is perhaps most importantly the source and energy for any creative pursuit. Poetry allows one to break the numerous shackles imposed by conforming thought, rituals, in cultures, and so on. If one thinks that the entire universe is conscious, then one becomes a keen observer to listen with empathy to all forms of sound, to see visions, and experience the flow of movement of life itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for speaking. That was great to hear from you. Next, we will hear from Steve Kaneko, one of the original members of the Microsoft design team, who led the hardware design group. Steve is an award-winning designer who believes that, at its best, design is about creating empathetic relationships between people and the man-made artifacts in their lives. Steve, can I invite you to unmute?
All done.
Wonderful. Please, you have the floor.
Great. Good morning, good night, good afternoon, wherever all of you are. Isha, Uday, thanks for giving me a chance to share my thoughts here. By way of introduction, Uday and I have probably known each other for at least 30 years, Uday. And after reading his manuscript, it became super apparent to me that it felt like I was reading a little bit of my own career because we're definitely contemporaries in the world of design. Uday being at Sonic Rim, as many of you know, and all of you know. And I spent my parallel career at Microsoft for almost 30 years. And we, in fact, met, I think, back in 1995 or so, when Uday just left Fitch with Liz Sanders, Kevin Schmidt, Marty Gage, start Sonic Rim. And I think Microsoft was one of the first projects that Sonic Rim worked on outside of Fitch. I think from that point on, it became pretty obvious, at least to myself and those who were part of that contract, that the ability to look outside of everything we think we know, to call it the ego of a corporation, and all of us who think we're smart engineers or designers, and to be able to find insights in others was a very important moment for us at a time when, we were designing keyboards and mice. And there are very fixed function things where, you could actually, as an individual, design something with a very singular point of view where the ego can run amok, where you think as a designer, my act of composing needs that confidence and clarity. So it's a very important part I still hold on to. What I didn't know at the time was the techniques of participatory design that Sonic Rim was introducing was in fact the future of design, where we were actually thinking and building using the collective imagination and ego to build what could be at that time broader experiences instead of just the product itself. And I think if there's one thing, well, to take away that I took away at least that resonated most, Uday, we've chatted a little bit about this in the book. It is that negotiation between ego and no ego, singular inspiration and creation, and co-creation. And that is one thing that I think way back when, in a time when, at least a company like Microsoft, we were very competency-based, meaning in a large organization, what you did and your ideas were singular, and you have to hold on to them and protect them, which created an environment very, I am smarter than you. I'm not being generous, but there was a little bit of that way back when in the so-called Bill Gates world. And it was a way to survive in that environment where you had to be right all the time. I had to have the idea. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but that was generally how you had to act and perform and how you would reward. Having worked on and having to bridge away from pure industrial design into the world of software, it became super apparent that that mindset made it impossible to design. As many of you know out there who are designing experiences in software, software is not built that way. And in fact, you take thousands of developers to build one product. So that idea that any one singular idea or individual or said ego could actually build something that could be one, built, but also developed in such a way where it felt like it was just one thing was impossible. So the need for collaboration and the techniques of co-creation that really strip the ego from the process of a designer in that world to compose something with everybody else's ideas, I think was where I saw the magic of what Uday brings to the world and what the participatory design process brought to the world. It was a necessary part of at least my personal development. And in this book, I saw, as I mentioned, myself very much in my growth, along with Uday, from his origins of being influenced by his parents, all the way through working through. Was someone going to say something?
I thought you said there were not enough cards.
Someone's off
What
of
cards are
mute.
there?
Can you please mute?
No, I'm not coming. Which card is it?
Sorry, Steve.
No.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. I want to wrap by saying there's something very interesting that all of you who know Uday, I would say the joy of reading the book, it's kind of like a conversation with Uday. You'll start with on a personal note, hey, how's the family? How's Isha? You know, and then you move into some grounding things where you start talking about work and what we used to do together and whatnot. And it's like, wow, that feels kind of good. Yeah, I remember those issues. And then all of a sudden you move into a philosophical conversation about why we're designing and what we're doing. And it became a life conversation. And then Uday will then move into poetry and what he's doing at the moment. And it's just bobbing and weaving, like a conversation with Uday, where you find yourself completely engaged, but having to work it just a little bit to actually find that thread that holds that conversation all together. And you walk away saying, oh my gosh, where am I? I'm so disoriented. But you realize you learn something about yourself after the conversation. And I think this is one of those one of the things that I admire about Uday, and I think it comes across perfectly in this book, where it reads and feels like a conversation that can be disorienting, but it's on you to find the thread, and it's there without question of how these things, how you connect those dots. So anyway, Uday, I think, again, congratulations and thank you. And when you ask me what this book in summary is, I think it's a gift of yours, at least to someone like myself, of how to live I'd call it the participatory life that is not singular, where we're by ourselves, all lonely in our own ego, to one that is much more inclusive, loving, and open to others. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Steve. That was wonderful. Our next speaker is Edie Adams, who is Director of Human Factors and User Research at Microsoft. Edie is trained in product design, design research, and occupational ergonomics. Her innovations have been recognized with over 150 US design patents, and her design work is included, 150 US patents, and her design work is included in the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Edie, may I invite you to unmute?
Sure. Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to have the opportunity to talk with you all about Uday's new book, Being and Belonging. I think I'd like to start with a quote that I've come across as I've been reading Uday's book that I think sort of captures what we're all about here. And it's a quote that's attributed to Albert Einstein. Creativity is intelligence having fun.
खरंच जाऊन ये. I want to go for my
I don't think
walk
I need
and
to
everything.
explain that any more than just saying it.
I'm
Creativity
not going to
is
see another car.
intelligence having
I don't
fun.
want any other car.
Anyway,
You're
I
not
want to
telling me.
start by
It's the fact that you're not telling
thanking
me.
you for
Just tell me,
opening
no?
up your life to
If
us.
you're going to some other dealer,
Sorry, Edie, I'm going to ask you just for one moment. I need to mute somebody
Yep.
who is speaking on the call.
I
Audience members, please mute. Anyone who is not muted is being
the
heard by
call.
everybody. Audience members, please mute.
Sharmila, please mute.
It's fine. I got it. Thank you. Edie, I'm so sorry for the interruption. Please
Okay.
go ahead.
Okay. I want to say thank you to Uday for sharing your life with us. Being and Belonging reads like a memoir, but it's so much more than that. In the book, I see that your design practice and your life are all one. There's no difference between them. Co-creation is a design method for sure, but it's also how you've lived your life. And that comes through in the book. I got to know Uday in the 90s, actually probably earlier than that, because we were both part of the circle around Liz Sanders. And the start of our professional careers overlapped. Also with Steve, who you've already heard from this morning. We had the opportunity to do projects together. And it was kind of amazing to see how our views of design and people as a point of inspiration in design really affected the work we were doing at Microsoft in those early days. Um, I've carried that sort of common ethos of participatory design throughout my career, and it's still a grounding in my product making. So from conversations and interaction 30 odd years ago, it's still part of how I approach making new products and how I think about what's the point of designing anything in this world. So that comes through in the book, and I hope other people can have something of the same experience of you, of learning that through reading the book, as opposed to being in person together and connecting on a much more visceral, like literally body way of being together. Um, I want to share a short story about Uday that I think exemplifies being and belonging. Um, a couple of years ago, I hosted a gathering, a party at my house to celebrate Uday's book of poetry, Imagination and Consciousness. This gathering could be described as a book launch, and as such, it was successful. All of those of us in attendance, we had a common focus is that we were all there for Uday, and we shared a physical time and space. But it was so much more than that. Because what Uday was able to do through his presence and his connection with all of us was create that sense of belonging. And what he was able to do was to create a multi-threaded community that arose from that gathering, from our collective focus on Uday's poetry. And that was co-creation to me at its most exemplary. We all had an idea of what we wanted to be in the place for, but Uday made it something about all of us and made it something that otherwise wouldn't have existed in the world. And we were all incredibly enriched by it. So I went back to imagination and consciousness because it's something that I open up fairly regularly. I keep a copy here in my office. And I thought Uday's words in a poem that he wrote called Possibilities was something that we all needed to hear this morning. So I'm going to read you these words. And this is Possibilities. I am curious about the possibilities that can emerge from creating a shared space of imagination. In that space, we will create comfort, trust, and a feeling of safety. So we can leave behind our biases, shed our baggage, subdue our ego, lower our expectations, activate our senses, and breathe life into the emptiness together. To me, that's Uday. And thank you so much for sharing all of yourself in your book of being and belonging. And I'm absolutely more than stoked to be part of your journey. Thanks, Uday.
Thank you so much, E. That was beautiful. Breathing life into the emptiness. Absolutely beautiful. Thank you. Um, our next speaker is Simona. Well, thank you, Simona, for joining us. Simona is the co-founder and director of the Copenhagen Institute of Interaction Design. She's passionate about design solutions that create positive impact on this world. Simona, you have the floor to share your perspectives of this book.
Thank you. Thank you for the invite, Uday, and thank you for making me part of this, what feels already like a wonderful team of people. And this is your magic, Uday. I also want to start with a little story. I met Uday twice in my life. The first time in Mauritius, of all places, very exotic. You remember, Uday, like back in 2006 or 7. My daughter was 2 months old, and we were invited to be part of this faculty of something called 180 Academy. So a kind of divergent type of education for leaders. And with Uday, it's impossible not to be affected by, his magic of just feel like your best friend from the first time you meet him, just like someone very warm, very open, very generous, very incredibly empathic. And then we met, I think, once another time in Copenhagen at the co-creation workshop as a follow-up to that meeting in Mauritius. And then we've been in touch like email, LinkedIn, and so on. But it's amazing how, then you reach out with the meeting, with the message. You send a book to our homes, and it's just amazing how you're so incredible in building these connections. And now I feel very privileged to be part of this team. Anyway, I already spent a minute on just saying thank you for being in my life. And I must say that thinking of you and reading the book and really letting my also imagination go, I feel like you give us a chance of almost touching with our hands, or at least understanding with our hearts and mind and spirit what design was before the Industrial Revolution. Before the Industrial Revolution, design, I think, was a very different practice. I don't even know if the word innovation existed actually, but with the Industrial Revolution, all the logic, or most of the logics in relation to design, are now dictated by economies of scales of the machine. So there is an investment to be made in the production and in engineering and machines and manufacturing that needs to justify the way we serve the needs of people. So all of a sudden, design is not based on a dialogue between the person who needs something and the person who is making something. So between the customer or the client or the user and the person producing it. Before the Industrial Revolution, everything was based on that dialogue. There would be like a prototype to be tested, a dialogue between who is making, who is using, a supply chain which would be very local, and again, sense of community. People would help each other, also for convenience. And of course, we were not able to connect to global markets as also in terms of sourcing as we are today. So when I read your book, and also when I remember how you are, and when I sense you, I really feel like this idea that maybe you are bringing us back to what design used to be and was for like thousands of years until the Industrial Revolution kicked in and completely changed once again basically the decision-making process behind many design decisions. And I came up with, by reading the book, and also I came up with a few words that I think are connected. And one of them is balance. When I read about, again, your input and your imagination, and when I think about the design in the way you teach us and the way you tell us about, I think design is a lot about balance, balancing the act between the user needs or the people's needs and what can actually be produced, also in terms of ethics and environmental and social regeneration. I don't say sustainability any longer, I talk about regeneration. Also a lot about scale. If we need like to produce 10 of these items or 100 of these items because we know that some people will use them, what's the point of creating more, which is something that the Industrial Revolution has actually changed as a dynamic, right? So back then there was balance between the needs and so on. There was scale in terms of being aware of what should be produced and why, but also the concept of design as a constant evolution. The idea of producing something, designing something, imagining something that is just better than what we have today and evolve. The goal was not growth. The goal was evolution. Nowadays, like in most of markets and productions and also design environments, like a key goal is to grow and grow and grow and sell more and more and more and more. But before the Industrial Revolution, the paradigm was more based on evolution than growth. And then, of course, proximity, which goes back to your idea of community, the idea of supporting each other and be sharing this process of designing, prototyping, sourcing. Supply chain were very much based on trust, which requires proximity and so on. So, and then also mutualism, this idea of exchange of value between what you build and what you are and so on. So sorry for maybe having gone a little bit into meta level, but interestingly enough, these words belong to nature. So at least at CID, we have like now for quite a few years integrated in our design processes when we work with our students, but also with our partners and industries and so on, concepts coming from biomimicry. So the idea of using nature as a mentor. And some of the keywords that keep coming back from nature are exactly these. In nature, there is balance. It's about scale. You can always zoom out or zoom in and look at the ecosystem at very different levels. The goal of nature is not growth. It's evolution, as it should be, I think, for design. And the proximity. So things happen because of things being close to each other. And of course, mutualism and so on. So I saw this parallelism between your approach, or anyway, what you inspired in me. I don't know if that's what you had in mind, but and nature, and maybe it could be an interesting evolution, also maybe for a next book or some kind of conversation or reflection, also with this great group of people. One thing I would suggest is that your book should be sold to the next generation of designers. I mean, it should be part of the pedagogy of design schools today, and make sure that we bring people back to what, the nature of design in terms of creating value for people and also for the planet. So I think it should be part of, and make sure that my students at least read it. But it brings a perspective on design that I think it's a way more authentic and strong than, being focused on other aspects that maybe are taking a little bit too much of a lead today. Yeah, and then a book that came to mind by reading your book was The Social Construction of Technology, an old book from the 90s, I think, from Birker, a Dutch sociologist who was talking about the fact that a new idea is an invention, but an innovation is an invention that creates social economic impact. Unless people adopt the invention, there is no innovation. So just there was some connection there. Yeah, sorry, maybe I took too long.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Simona, for sharing your words and thoughts with us. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Thomas Daffern. Let me give a quick introduction. Mr. Thomas Daffern is many things: philosopher, historian, poet, author, lecturer, musician, educator, consultant, and peace studies specialist. He is chair on the World Intellectuals Wisdom Forum and also director on the International Institute of Peace Studies and Global Philosophy. Thomas, you have the floor.
Well, greetings. Hello, everybody. And hello, Uday. Congratulations on your book, which I've enjoyed immensely reading. I've got about 6 or 7 points I want to make in time. The first thing I want to say is to congratulate you on becoming a poet. It's been a long journey. Well done. And what maybe you didn't realize is I'm also a poet. There's a lot of sort of synchronistic overlap here. When I was 16, 15, 14, I used to come to Paris in France and wander the streets, and I decided I wanted to become a poet. The conventional education I was offered in Brighton in Sussex was dismal, boring, technical, only the poets were speaking the truth, I decided. So I dropped out of school early and became a poet. And I thought I was going to write loads of poetry and die young. Anyway, you've got the bug, I can tell, and I hope it blossoms. Later, I decided to live longer and become a philosopher as well, because I discovered that philosophy is just the meaning behind the poetry. One graduates through poetry to philosophy, and I sense that in your work. You're also a philosopher as well as a designer. And I want to say that I founded the Order of Wandering Peace Poets back in the 90s at the Struga Poetry Festival. So I just would like to invite you to become a member of this open secret society of poets working for peace, because the pen is mightier than the sword. That is our logo. So you definitely deserve to be in that club. So I want to talk a bit about design. I always go to etymology. And as a philosopher of languages, I've written a book called The 99 Names of Peace, which looks at the etymology of all the words for peace on the planet, going back to the Indo-European roots of Sanskrit and, Welsh, the Celtic languages. And design means to see the signs. And it's about signing or semiotics. So I think we're all trying to discern the signs of the times in this confusing and complex, era we're living through. I think your book is helpful for that. it's showing us the trackways, the paths. And I love the way you've crafted the book into these series of pathways. That's a stroke of genius. This book should be a painting. You could get an artist to design a sort of mandala of it, showing each of the pathways. I'm also interested in design, and I have a project on as a peace activist. I want to build a nonagon on top of the Pentagon. The nonagon is a 9-sided building that would sit on top of the flat roof of the Pentagon, which is a 5-sided building dedicated to war. And I think we need a nonagon dedicated to peace. This would house the American Institute of Peace. So it's a visionary project that came to me visiting Leonardo da Vinci's grave in Amboise, near where I live. So there's a design challenge to everyone on this call. Let's build a nonagon. And I think Uday should be part of that. The other thing I want to say is, you don't know this, but you've written a book called Being and Belonging. So as a philosopher, I've written a huge 10-volume work called Being and Knowledge. Now, you know, this is a sequel to Being and Nothingness by Sartre and Being and Time by Heidegger. It's the third of a sequence. So I'm reflecting on your book as I'm reading it. I'm thinking, interesting this. The question of being itself, which you kind of go to at some points in the book, is interesting. And of course, that's what Aristotle defined as the essence of metaphysics, the study of being as being. Not things, everything has being, but what is being itself? And I think that your work has metaphysical implications. And I want to just mention, if you're not aware of it, in your text, you're quite, several times you defend the concept of being an atheist. It obviously means a lot to you. However, when I've taught philosophy, we always have to introduce our students to the design argument for the existence of God. It's one of the most famous thought experiments in history, going back to Aristotle. I recommend, if you're into design, relook at the design argument for the existence of, we can call it creative intelligence, divine intelligence, you know, something beyond the ego that is supremely intelligent, that must be responsible for creating all this, the designer, the great architect, whatever name we use. And I've come up with the word holotheism. I define myself as a holotheist. My understanding of the design architect or the divine architect is inclusive of all the deity images and none. We can't comprehend that totality. So it has to be an open-ended thing, which is a phrase you love, Uday, and I like that. Okay, and on design terms, I designed this periodic table of the world's religious and philosophical traditions. It is one of my little ventures into design, which shows them all. And I'd like that to be in all schools and universities. And if anyone wants to design it for T-shirts and cups, you know, and handbags, that'd be great. The other thing I love about your book, Uday, is the stages of life. Towards the end of the book, you take us on a journey, and we realize we've been led to the edge of the forest, to use your immortal words. You know, that's a blessing, and I think we're all on that journey. And you're at the stage of life where you're free to tell the truth. So many of us have constraints when we're younger in an institution. We can't, you know, speak. Well, thank God you're breaking free and you're on the edge of the forest. And the other thing, just a couple of final things. I love the way you talk about music. You have a whole chapter. Music is the language of the gods, if you want, Sarasvati and the muses. So thanks for mentioning music. And also, finally, to finish, imagination. Again and again, you come back to imagination. It's in the title of the book. Many philosophers, starting with Plato and others, have come to this idea of the collective imagination of humanity. And in Buddhist metaphysics, we call it the alaya vijnana, the collective imagination or storehouse consciousness. And I think we can talk about collective liberation or collective enlightenment intelligently if we relook at the role of imagination in our own journeys, as you've had the courage to do. So thank you. You're a pioneer, and we're all in your debt. Thanks, Uday.
Thank you so much, Thomas, for sharing your thoughts with us. So I will introduce our last speaker, Michael McKay. Michael is the Vice President of Digital Products at Novo Nordisk. He is an expert in fostering user-driven innovation and co-creation cultures within large organizations. Thank you, Michael, for recording your thoughts.
Good afternoon, good evening to everyone. My name is Michael McKay. I'm sorry I couldn't be live today. I'm recording this from the island of Sardinia, where I'm taking a few days off from busy work life. I have been a student, an admirer, and also a friend of Uday for many years, and I want to today to share with you how this book, Being and Belonging, and also the work of Uday has really influenced my work life. He has illuminated this idea of engaging our colleagues in the design profession, that designers cannot just go away and do our thing and come back with our insights or designs. We need to design with our colleagues and not for our colleagues. We need to design with our customers and not for our customers. From all the global travels that Uday has done, this understanding that working with people to understand who they are, but also designing with people. Uday is the person for me who coined the word co-creation in the best way possible, and that has really influenced my work life. And I feel this emanating through the book Being and Belonging. So the experimental and the playful, creative way of bringing about work, that's important. Uday has shown me through the years, and he talks about it in his book, the way that we need to bring poetry and playfulness into corporate work life as well. It's not enough to talk about it, we need to do it in our co-creation sessions. So also creating direct connections. Uday is a person who has always brought direct connections between myself and people that he finds in his life, and he truly has a very big network, and I think that our session today witnesses that. Our workplaces and our organizations themselves must embody this human centricity. This means that fostering a culture of empathy, collaboration, and recognizing the individual needs and aspirations of our teams has to be part of our work as leaders and as designers. I think in conclusion that Uday's Being and Belonging, it has been and it continuously is an influence on my work. It solidifies my commitment to co-creation and human centricity. By embracing Uday's principles of creatively sharing these rich insights we gather around the world as we go about our research and our lives, we can guide our organizations toward more impactful and meaningful outcomes. Remembering that true innovation lies in understanding the connection with the human heart.
Amazing. Thank you to all of our speakers. It is really amazing to hear how each person has brought their lens and their experiences to the insights in this book. We heard about separating from ego, learning from nature, going back to the roots of design, and embracing collective imagination. In the final minutes, we'll hear from the team behind the book. I will introduce each of you, and then I'll have a question for each of you to respond to. So first off, we have Dr. Peter Kwok Chan, designer. He is an associate professor in the Department of Design at The Ohio State University. His research focuses on visual communication design, collaborative design, brand design, with an emphasis on emotion-driven approaches to strategic design challenges. We also have Molly Pearson, who is the editor of this book. Molly brings her learnings from horse racing, endurance, intuition, attention to subtleties, and she brings these learnings to her global travels, book editing, and caring for horses at home. And then finally, of course, we have Uday Dandavate, the author of this book. who is a design activist, poet, and champion of co-creation. Thank you, three of you, for being here with us. I've started a question to bring a provocation to this conversation, but feel free to answer as you will. My first question is for Peter. Peter, can you tell us about one design decision you made as you developed the experience of this book? And how do you hope that it influences the audience?
Thank you, Isha. First, I want to express my deep appreciation and thank you to Uday for inviting me to be a part of this project. Throughout this process of designing this book, these beautiful books, I have the privilege of engaging in many conversations with Uday and Molly, whether it's through email, text messaging, phone call, or even I follow Uday's social media posts. Usually I don't follow social media, but once I start following Uday's social media posts, I'm just fall right into that. So I respond to his writing, Uday's writing, his stories, and his voices, mostly as a friend that I have known for over 30 years. I have the opportunity to watch Uday evolve from a design graduate student at OSU, where I'm teaching now, a valuable colleague that we have chance to work with at Richardson Smith and Fitch, a dedicated researcher and the principal of his company, Sonic Rim, which I have the opportunity to design their identity. Thank you. And also, of course, Uday is an insightful thinker and inspiring poet. So working with Uday on this project truly made me feel like living out the title of his book, A Journey of Curiosity and Imagination. From the very beginning, one of my core design decisions was not to design it. What I meant by this, I have made a conscious effort to let the layout of this book support his pathways, support the flow and the structure of Uday's writing, the text and the typography. My goal was very simple. As many of my the speaker here today previously mentioned, separate myself as a designer without any ego, okay? I want to create a humble space where the reader could immerse themselves into Uday's story and poems, allowing his voice to take the center stage. Through this approach, I hope to guide the audience into a seamless reading experience that they feel personal, inviting, and deeply reflective of Uday's unique voice and story. So that's my approach. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. The design of this book was truly beautiful, and thank you for sharing some of your thought process behind it with us. Next, I have a question for Molly. Molly, are you also here?
I'm here.
Hi, Molly. If I remember early on, there were a lot of discussions within the book team about the structure of the book. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, we had a lot of conversations about how this particular book could serve people best. And there were a lot of conversations around, is this going to be a more generic look at sort of design as a concept, or is it going to be more of Uday's life story, or is it going to be something that is very specific to the world of design? And so we had a lot of collaborative conversations around where to take the book, where to focus, how to focus. And so much of the work that Uday and I do together really starts off with a lot of questions. We don't necessarily have the answers, but we toss a lot of questions back and forth, and then the finished product just kind of emerges as a result of being in the question of things.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how you approach that process to help some of the core messages of the book come through?
Yeah, I'm always really interested in what authors want their book to do. I can edit in any number of ways, but really the most important thing is making sure what the author wants to have come alive is something that comes alive. And so in conversations with Uday, I said, is this really your own personal life story? And I think he thought about it for a bit and said, I want to get out of the way a little bit. I don't want it to be about me. It's sort of ego-based, egocentric. And there was also a bit of a challenge in that too, because I think that personal stories do resonate so deeply with people. And so I challenged him a bit to add a little bit more of himself and his history and his life to it as well. And so everything kind of, I guess, emerged over the course of time together in a more unified way as a result of these conversations. And so, so much of the work that I do as an editor is really trying to understand what it is that the author wants to create and who it is that they're writing for. Because if you try and be everything to everybody, you end up being nothing to nobody.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Molly, for sharing that with us. And on the note of challenging the author to bring more of himself to the book and to the space, I want to bring the final question to Baba Uday. With my final question, I want to actually go back to the beginning. Tell us about what was your intention with writing this book, and how do you feel now that you have heard so many reactions to it?
Great question. So, number one, this artifact, as you might call it, was not a product of intention. It was an outcome of osmosis. As you mentioned earlier in the introduction, the COVID-19 pandemic times were moments of reflection for all of us. We had time and space and loneliness to get deep inside ourselves, observe the world in ways that we had never seen, and think about who am I, what am I doing here, and what do I want to do further. During that time, I discovered poetry. I undertook a project called, an oral history project called Legacy of India's Imagination, where I've interviewed 60 people in different fields about how their imagination has evolved over time. I did a lot of community conversations in people's homes, like Edie talked about, in bars, pubs, libraries, just street corners. I looked at every opportunity to go out and talk to people, listen to people. I visited NGOs in India. Manisha is here. I went to her project. I also went to Bhuj, saw projects there. Through all these conversations and observations, began to emerge an interesting view of my life and how I think. And I think the biggest striking conversation was my conversation with Rajmohan Gandhi, grandson of Mahatma Gandhi. In the course of our conversation, he said, Uday, I've written several biographies, but the way you are approaching your questions and this conversation, I feel I have never been asked to think about how I think. And this is for the first time I'm thinking about how I think. That comment stayed in my mind. And then one day, about a year and a half ago, when I was sitting down, I was already on sabbatical from my work. I decided I don't want to hustle anymore. An idea came. I said, you know what? I need to think about how I think. I opened my server, started looking at all the articles I've written in 30 years, and began to think what has been the evolution of my curiosity and imagination. This was an essentially a way of responding to all these observations and learnings and insights and epiphanies that came to me over these 5 years. The book began to emerge. I reached out to Peter, I reached out to Molly. They both gave me a lot of feedback. It was quite fragmented. Um, Molly kept asking me, what is this? That really helped me channelize my thoughts. So, to answer your question, Molly asked me that question, who is it for and why are you writing this? I didn't have an answer. I struggled. I said, I'm just exploring my own mind. I'm just exploring evolution of my mind. But then she said, no, but you are putting it in a book. So who do you want to read it and why? And I think the answer came to me from a mother of a girl who's now getting ready to prepare for high school. I met her for the first time on a flight several years ago. She was sitting behind me on the flight, and her daughter at that time was, I think, 8 or 10 years old. I asked her if I could give my Finding Your Bibo book to her. And she said yes, she saw the book. And since then, she has bought every book of mine. But last month, she wrote to me saying, Uday, I just bought your book. It's amazing. I want my daughter to read it. She's getting ready for going to college. And I think it will make her think. And hopefully, your version of design is something that will guide her to apply her imagination in choosing her career. And that I had a spark. Now that the book is done, I found its purpose through the voices of a mother of a child who says this is something that will open her curiosity, her interest in exploring her opportunities and possibilities. So I would say that's what it is. If it serves in opening minds and exploring possibilities with a philosophical, humanitarian, caring voice, it would serve its purpose.
Thank you so much, Uday. Thank you so much to all the speakers. This book has been an amazing invitation to many people to reflect on what it means to them, what these learnings and how they could be applied to different fields of life. Thank you all for engaging with us today and for the team who contributed to the creation of this book. And finally, thank you to Uday for bringing us all together with your imagination. Congratulations.